Marco Polo became the first traveler to introduce Europe to the distant world of Asia. Thanks to his stories and book, many Europeans learned about China and the East, along with their traditions, technologies, and wealth for the very first time. At just 17 years old, Marco Polo set off along the Silk Road with his father and uncle. They crossed seas, deserts, mountains, and treacherous trade routes on their journey east. This voyage lasted for years and changed his life forever. Eventually, the Polo expedition arrived at the court of Kublai Khan in China. The sheer scale, wealth, and organization of the empire astounded Marco. Europe had never heard descriptions of such a world before. The Khan preferred hiring foreigners for government positions to avoid nepotism. He took a liking to Marco because of the young man's sharp wit and curiosity. As a result, Polo spent 17 years carrying out diplomatic and administrative assignments. During this time, he traveled across various regions of the Mongol Empire, studying its cultures, cities, and technologies. His final mission for the Khan was to escort a Mongol princess to her wedding in Persia. They set sail with a massive fleet. The voyage proved to be long and deadly. Many ships and crew members were lost, but they successfully completed the mission. After that, Marco Polo and his small remaining crew managed to return to Venice on their surviving ships. Having been away from home for 20 years, they were unrecognizable to their own families. During a war between Venice and Genoa, Marco lost a naval battle and was captured. In prison, he met a romance writer named Rustichello of Pisa. Captivated by Marco's travel stories, Rustichello decided to write them down. Their work, The Travels of Marco Polo, spread all across Europe. After his release, Marco married, had children, and continued working as a merchant for the rest of his life, never leaving Europe again. Marco Polo inspired generations of travelers and explorers. His stories expanded Europe's understanding of the world and helped spark the Age of Discovery. Zheng He was a Chinese admiral, diplomat, and explorer during the Ming Dynasty. His naval expeditions in the early 15th century were the largest in history for their time. Long before the European Age of Discovery, they demonstrated China's immense power far beyond Asia. Born in 1371 into a Hui Chinese Muslim family, he was originally named Ma He. During the Ming military campaigns, the young boy was captured, castrated, and sent to serve at the court of Prince Zhu Di. Ma He quickly proved his talent and became one of the prince's most trusted confidants, actively helping him in his struggle for power. When Zhu Di claimed the imperial throne, he granted his aide the surname Zheng and gave him the exclusive right to wear yellow dragon robes, a symbol of extraordinary status. Contemporaries described Zheng He as a man of towering height and commanding presence. In 1405, Zheng He commanded his first naval expedition. The sheer scale of the fleet was staggering. Hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men, including soldiers, translators, doctors, and astrologers. His fleet visited Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. The goal of these voyages was not conquest, but rather showing off China's grandeur and expanding trade. One of the most unusual treasures brought back to China was a giraffe from Africa. The animal looked so bizarre to the locals that many believed it was the Qilan, a mythical creature and a symbol of divine blessing. In total, Zheng He led 7 massive expeditions, turning the Ming Empire into the dominant naval superpower of the 15th century. However, following the deaths of both Zheng He and the emperor, China's policies shifted radically. The fleet was burned along with Zheng He's charts and journals, and maritime trade was strictly banned. This brought an abrupt end to the era of great Chinese naval exploration, ushering in 4 centuries of isolation. Christopher Columbus was a navigator of the Age of Discovery, whose 1492 voyage across the Atlantic changed world history. Born in Genoa, Columbus lacked a university education but was entirely self-taught in geography and the accounts of early travelers. He was deeply influenced by Ptolemy's writings and Marco Polo's stories about the riches of the East. Columbus became convinced that the route to Asia across the Atlantic Ocean was much shorter than scholars believed. To validate his theory, he intentionally underestimated the size of the Earth, remaining certain that Japan was only a few weeks' sail away. Columbus approached the rulers of Portugal, England, and Spain to pitch his plan for a sea route to India, but royal advisors repeatedly criticized his calculations. Ultimately, Queen Isabella I of Castile, desperate to replenish her empty treasury, decided to take a gamble on Columbus. Under their agreement, he was granted the right to become viceroy of any new lands and a share of all future riches. In the summer of 1492, the expedition set sail with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña. As the weeks passed without a glimpse of land, anxiety among the crew began to rise. To keep the men calm, Columbus intentionally falsified his logs to underreport the actual distance traveled. On October 12, 1492, the expedition finally reached the Bahamas. Convinced he had reached the outskirts of India, Columbus called the local inhabitants Indians. The primary goal of the Spaniards quickly became the hunt for gold, and they began constructing Spanish fortifications on the newly claimed territories. However, the settlement was poorly run. Settlers complained about terrible management, severe food shortages, and harsh punishments. Discontent with Columbus's governance eventually reached the Spanish court. In 1500, Francisco de Bobadilla arrived in the colony. Upon seeing Spanish officers hanging from the gallows, he ordered Columbus arrested and sent back to Spain in chains. Although the navigator was later freed, he never regained his former influence. Columbus spent the final years of his life trying to prove the immense value of his discoveries. Until his dying day, he firmly believed he had found a sea route to Asia. Ferdinand Magellan was a navigator and the organizer of the first circumnavigation in human history. Although Magellan himself did not complete the journey, it was his expedition that proved it was possible to sail all the way around the globe. Magellan was born around 1480 in Portugal and participated in naval campaigns from a young age. He served in the Indian Ocean and studied trade routes to the Spice Islands, where valuable spices were produced. Magellan proposed a plan to Portuguese King Manuel I to reach the Spice Islands by sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, but he was turned down. Following this rejection, Magellan shifted his allegiance to King Charles I of Spain. Spain was eager to find its own route to the riches of Asia and break Portugal's trade monopoly. Magellan falsely claimed that he knew of a secret passageway, which successfully convinced the Spanish crown to back him. In 1519, an expedition of 5 ships set sail from Seville. The crew crossed the Atlantic Ocean and began exploring the coast of South America, searching for a strait leading to the other ocean. The search dragged on for months as the sailors battled bitter cold, violent storms, and severe food shortages. During a layover at Puerto San Julian, several captains launched a mutiny against Magellan. The commander responded ruthlessly. The rebellion was crushed, and its leaders were executed. In the fall of 1520, the expedition finally discovered a passage through a narrow, winding strait. This route would later be named the Strait of Magellan. Upon exiting the strait, the ships entered a brand new ocean. Because of its calm waters, Magellan named it the Pacific Ocean. However, Europeans had no idea just how massive this ocean was, and crossing it took more than 3 months. Provisions quickly spoiled, leaving the crew to suffer from starvation and scurvy. In the spring of 1521, the ships reached the Philippine Islands. To everyone's surprise, Magellan's enslaved servant, Enrique, could understand the local language. Seizing the opportunity, Magellan attempted to form alliances with local rulers while simultaneously promoting Christianity. However, getting entangled in a conflict between rival chieftains led to an armed clash on Mactan Island. On April 27, 1521, confident in Spain's technological superiority, Magellan led 50 soldiers against hundreds of warriors commanded by chieftain Lapu-Lapu. The chieftain quickly realized that while breastplates protected the Spaniards' chests, their legs were completely exposed. At the cost of his own life, Magellan held the line to cover his soldiers' retreat. Following his death, the remaining sailors decided to press on toward the Spice Islands. Ultimately, only one ship, the Victoria, commanded by Juan Sebastián Elcano, made it back to Seville. Out of the entire expedition, only 18 men returned home, but the precious cargo of spices they brought back completely covered the financial losses of the voyage. James Cook was an 18th-century British navigator, cartographer, and explorer whose expeditions significantly expanded Europe's knowledge of the globe. Cook was born in 1728 to a working-class family in England. In his youth, he began working on merchant coal ships, where he learned the ropes of seafaring and mastered the basics of navigation. He was deeply committed to self-education, spending his free time studying mathematics, astronomy, and cartography. During the 7 Years' War between Great Britain and France, Cook enlisted in the Royal Navy. He gained recognition for creating highly accurate charts of the St. Lawrence River, which allowed the British fleet to successfully approach Quebec. Following this success, Cook was given command of the HMS Endeavour and set off on his first major expedition to the Pacific Ocean. While the official mission was to observe the transit of Venus across the Sun, the expedition was secretly tasked with exploring uncharted territories in the Southern Hemisphere. In the 18th century, scurvy remained one of the leading causes of death for sailors on long voyages. Cook introduced sauerkraut to the crew's diet to combat the disease, but the sailors initially refused to eat such unusual food. To bypass this, Cook ordered that the sauerkraut be served only to the officers, treating the leftovers as a rare delicacy. Seeing this, the sailors soon demanded their own portions. For the first time in history, an expedition did not lose a single sailor to scurvy. During this journey, Cook extensively mapped New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia, which had never been explored by Europeans before. During his second expedition, which began in 1772, Cook went in search of the rumored southern continent. His ships became the first to cross the Antarctic Circle. Despite facing harsh weather and ice fields, Cook successfully proved that no habitable continent existed in the temperate latitudes of the southern hemisphere. Upon his return to Great Britain, Cook was celebrated as a national hero. His expeditions brought back an immense amount of scientific data, charts, and descriptions of the peoples of Oceania and the Pacific. In 1776, Cook embarked on his third and final voyage. His mission was to find the Northwest Passage, a sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across northern North America. During this journey, Cook reached the Hawaiian Islands, which were previously unknown to Europeans. However, tensions flared after locals stole one of the ship's cutters. A skirmish broke out on the shores of Hawaii, and James Cook was killed in the conflict. He was 50 years old. Cook's expeditions remain some of the most important in the history of geographical discovery, and his remarkably accurate charts were used by sailors worldwide for decades. Roald Amundsen was a Norwegian polar explorer who became the first person to reach the South Pole and the first to successfully navigate the Northwest Passage along the coast of North America. Amundsen was born in 1872 in Norway into a family of shipowners. From childhood, he was fascinated by seafaring and travel. Deeply inspired by stories of 19th-century Arctic expeditions, he decided to dedicate his life to polar exploration. Preparing for his future journeys, Amundsen focused heavily on physical conditioning and studying navigation. He earned his mate's license and was determined to master the skills needed to survive in extreme conditions. In the early 20th century, one of the greatest challenges for explorers remained finding the Northwest Passage, a sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through Canada's Arctic waters. In 1903, Amundsen set sail on a small sloop named the Jua. The journey took several years. While the expedition was forced to overwinter in the ice, Amundsen used this time to learn from the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. He adopted their techniques for making fur clothing, building snow shelters, and driving dog sleds. In 1906, the expedition successfully completed the transit. Amundsen became the first person to traverse the entire route by ship. However, Amundsen achieved his greatest fame during his race to the South Pole. His main rival was the British explorer Robert Falcon Scott. While both expeditions scrambled to reach the pole first, their strategies differed fundamentally. Amundsen relied on sled dogs, lightweight gear, and meticulously planned logistics. He established supply depots well in advance and calculated his route with extreme precision, drawing heavily on the survival skills he had learned from Arctic natives. On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundsen and his team became the first people in history to reach the South Pole. Later in life, the explorer turned his attention to aviation and airships. In 1926, he participated in the flight of the airship Norge, crossing the North Pole from Svalbard to Alaska. This flight is recognized as the first verified crossing of the North Pole by Air Amundsen's final expedition was a rescue mission. In 1928, the Italian airship Italia crashed in the Arctic. Amundsen joined the search for the missing crew, but the seaplane he was traveling in vanished over the Barents Sea. It is believed to have crashed in severe weather. His body was never recovered.
History is not just what happened, it's what still echoes within us. If you felt this story, don't let it fade. Subscribe and step with us into the next chapter.